Hi, I'm Randall Westfall, pastor of Trinity Fellowship in Socorro and founder of Forerunner Ministries. We are embarking on a journey called Back to the Beginning. This is not designed to be a theological study as much as we would simply like to introduce to you some concepts that would be familiar to first century believers. So without any further ado, let's join the discussion.
Hi, and welcome back. We're here again this week with Randall and myself, Dina. And I think last week we left off with the feasts and the festivals, correct? With Shavuot and the other one I need a little help.
With the fall feasts are Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot.
Okay, Sukkot.
In Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we talked a little bit about Yeshua fulfilling the spring feast in his first coming, and the expectation of his fulfillment of the fall festivals in his second coming. The fall festivals begin in the biblical month, that is the seventh month of the biblical year. That falls roughly in the Gregorian calendar in mid to late September, sometimes into the early parts of October. Those dates are Yom Teruah, which is known in English as the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, which typically is translated in English as Day of Atonement, and finally the seventh festival of the cycle is Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Ingathering or the Feast of Booths in English.
Okay. It might take me a while to remember all those.
Well, that's not surprising. It's something that is a new concept for most of us, and so I have found I can teach this over and over and over again, and every time somebody will get something the next time that they didn't get the first time, and it's just pretty normal, actually.
Okay. So how do you observe those? What have you incorporated into your life?
We celebrate Yom Teruah as the day that we have an expectation of Messiah returning. Now, I know for our viewers that's a concept that sounds pretty outlandish because our English Bibles tell us that no one knows the day or the hour. However, the Hebrew idiom in the first century for no one knows the day or the hour, they were speaking specifically of the Feast of Trumpets, or what we call Yom Teruah. Yom Teruah happens on the first day of the seventh month on the biblical calendar. In Yeshua's time, they did not have a calendar that projected well into the future as we do. They simply waited for the moon to appear. It was spotted, and then they declared that this is the new moon. And therefore, it was Rosh Chodesh, or the first of the month. And the exciting part of that is we do the same kinds of things in our language today. If I were to say to you, Gina, hey, my wife and I are having a party on the 4th of July, and we'd like for you to come and, have a picnic and the fireworks and all of that stuff, you would understand that I'm talking about Independence Day.
Yeah.
The real name of that holiday is Independence Day, but who do you know that really calls it that? We all call it the 4th of July. Or sometimes we just say, hey, over the 4th, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And so we have idioms in our language the same way that they did in Yeshua's day. And so when he spoke of the day, no one knowing the day or the hour, he was referring to a specific time on Abba's calendar that we know as Yom Teruah. So on that first day of the seventh month, that is Yom Teruah, we begin a 10-day period that we know as the 10 days of awe. That is a time frame in which we have great expectation of Messiah releasing the wrath of Elohim upon the Antichrist and his legion of followers who have attacked Israel and have enslaved Israel to some extent. And we have the idea from Scripture that that 10-day period is the time frame between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. But in Hebrew, that word really implies judgment. So judgment comes upon God's enemies during this 10-day period of time between Yom Teruah, or what we know in English as the Feast of Trumpets, the day that we hear the trumpet blast, and the 10th day of the month when we hear the great shofar that Isaiah talks about, which will signal the bridegroom king coming to Jerusalem and being received as the King of the Jews, King of all Israel. The exciting part for us in our study in eschatology is that the fulfillment of the fall feast in Yeshua's return culminates with Sukkot, or what we know as the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles is an 8-day celebration that brings in the final agricultural harvest of the year in the physical realm, which would be olives and the grapes. And in the spiritual realm represents a great harvest culmination in which believers from all over the world will come to honor the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, where Yeshua will govern the world from that very spot for 1,000 years, with those who have been faithful and loyal to serve him in this age, serving alongside him in whatever capacity he assigns. We're not sure exactly what everybody's going to be doing, but whatever it will be exciting and glorious, because we'll be part of the restoration of the entire world prior to Yeshua giving the keys to the kingdom back to the Father.
When you say Temple Mount, are you talking about Israel?
I'm talking about in Jerusalem. That's correct. The Temple Mount is a place that has a great amount of angst associated with it. You're familiar, I'm sure, with it being an Islamic place of worship today. But restoration will come when Israel will be able to worship on the Temple Mount again in that day.
Can you explain a little more about the feast? I know, for me, I get a little confused understanding like the 10 days of awe and then the day of judgment, and trying to understand it or even kind of grasp my thinking around it.
Well, it is a little bit different because most of us have grown up in a world where we've thought that everything that Abba does is random, because we live on a solar calendar, a Gregorian calendar, in which his dates don't match up. And so what we find once you begin to understand and live by his calendar, the biblical calendar, you find out that the things that Elohim does is not random at all. That each one of these dates have a very special purpose. And in Hebrew, actually the word that describes what we do is mikra, which is the essence of rehearsal. And so every year you ask me the question, how do you incorporate these things that are not yet fulfilled into the lives of your people today? And we celebrate in anticipation of that day coming. So it is a dress rehearsal in the same way that a bride prefers to have the opportunity to kind of go through a rehearsal, usually on the day before the wedding day. We go through the process annually of rehearsing for that day. We study, we celebrate. It is a time of festivity, but it also is a time of us really learning to apply the Word, to understand it and to teach it and to be a witness to the nations. Because many people are not prepared for what lies ahead for us. They've lived in a world, and I understand it because my very first vehicle that I owned in the 70s was a vehicle that had a bumper sticker on the back of it that said, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned." And because we've grown up with this idea of a random fulfillment of his return, But there's nothing random in Scripture about his return. We just have not learned how to correctly divide and apply the word. And as we begin to understand the Hebrew and understand the idioms of the day, it begins to come to light as to really what Scripture is describing.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is there's definitely an order.
There's order. There's very much order. Because the king will come, the kinsman redeemer will come, and he will redeem the people, and he will redeem the land. And we're talking about the promised land. We're talking about the land promised to the descendants of Avraham, which
Of Abraham, right?
Abraham. Avraham in Hebrew,
Yeah.
Abraham in English. And we are sons and daughters of Abraham because the covenant we walk in with our Father is connected to the covenant of Abraham.
And we've been grafted in, which we talked about a couple weeks ago.
We've been grafted in. It is the most amazing story that our Father in heaven desired that not one would perish, that everyone would have access. You know, one of the amazing things to me is that in the process of the sons of Isaac, you know, coming to a place of one giving up his rightful place, and the other one sort of stealing his place as the firstborn. You know, that used to make me really uncomfortable. It's like I don't understand why the patriarchs dealt with things the way they did. And some of it's just that our English translations are a little bit lacking in describing what was taking place. But one of the things that always blesses me as we read through the Torah cycle is that the descendants of Esau were promised the opportunity to come back into the covenant, even though Esau lost the right for the Messiah to come through his lineage by giving up his right as the firstborn. But his descendants were given the promise that they would be able to come back into the covenant, and we see that come to pass later in Scripture as different men and women are added into the nation of Israel as proselytes, as being grafted in. One of the two men who went into the land as spies, as we call them, Caleb and Joshua, were the two that came back with a good report. Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, so he was a direct descendant of Joseph through Ephraim, his son, which meant that he had some Egyptian blood back there because Joseph's wife was an Egyptian. The other one who went into the land and came back with a good report was Caleb. Caleb was not an Israelite by birth. His lineage did not go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His lineage was through being grafted in, and he represented the tribe of Judah when he went into the land. So I just want to encourage our viewers to dig into Scripture, to go, get your concordance out, study Caleb, study Joshua, see how they interacted with the tribes and see their story. Because Caleb's story, this man who said at the age of 80 plus said, give me that mountain, was a man who did not inherit that because of his lineage. He inherited that because he was a man of faith. He believed Elohim. And he was rewarded by being one of the ones who actually went into the land in the renewed covenant that was made between Moses and the descendants of the ones who came out of Egypt. Okay. So it's a fascinating story, one that we can't really do justice, in a half an hour. But we're doing the best we can, given that.
I know I maybe got you off track because we were talking about the fall festivals and things like that. So I don't know if you want to go back to that and share a little bit about that or not.
Well, when we see the fulfillment of Yom Kippur, when the remnant that Paul says that one day all Israel will be saved. He's talking about the remnant that survives the terror of the Antichrist and his legion who rule and reign in the land during that last 3.5 years. And he foresaw the time when his people would receive Yeshua as their king and invite him to be their king, and the establishment of the Davidic lineage on the throne in Jerusalem would resume. But gloriously, 5 days after that is when the world will come to celebrate Sukkot, to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, and Scripture tells us that we will be doing that perpetually, that we will always be going to Jerusalem to celebrate Shabbat, to celebrate the feasts, and that most notably the nations must come to celebrate Sukkot, because if they will not come to celebrate Sukkot with Yeshua in the holy city, that their land will suffer drought and famine, and that there will be reward in that day for simply being obedient, which is the story from Adam all the way through Scripture. Is all Abba's looking for is a people who will be obedient.
And believe, too.
And believe. And believe. You know, the promises are conditional based on us trusting him and being faithful to him, being loyal to him, and simply loving him. The word says that we're to keep the commandments. The word in Hebrew literally means to guard. If Adam and Eve had not sinned and had not eaten the forbidden fruit, the design of the garden was that the garden would take care of them if they took care of the garden. And so, consequently, because they chose not to, they were forced into exile, and they had many other consequences. They had to toil. The labor of birthing a child became very painful for women. There were consequences for their actions, and there are consequences for our actions today, whether we choose to be obedient or whether we opt out for the disobedient side of things. And so we simply are trying to help our viewers and those who are with us to understand the word so that they can apply it correctly and guard it, because that is the essence of what we're to do, is to guard his word, preserve his word for our children and our grandchildren, so that they might flourish and be blessed.
And that's just what I was going to say, and with that comes blessing then.
With that comes blessing.
Yeah.
There are challenges, there are tests, there are times when things happen that you don't always understand why. But by and large, we see that the many things that happen in life is a result of some choices that we've made, some decisions that we've made. And yes, when it involves our sin, it is under the blood. But that doesn't mean that the consequences go away. Oftentimes, people are dealing with consequences and get mad at God because they think he should just wipe those consequences out. But those consequences are in place to teach us, to teach our children and our grandchildren, so that they hopefully don't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's our job, is to help people through that process.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, when you say that, it just makes me think of King David, and a man faithful after God's own heart, but there were things he entered into that there were consequences that he dealt with.
There were many men who died because of the decisions that he made. And so he's that character that we all would love to hear those words from our Father, that this is a man after my own heart. I think we all long to hear those words from our Father.
Sure.
And he did hear those words. And yet he was an imperfect man who made mistakes. And that gives me hope, because I recognize that some things that I've done I would like to go back and change, but they're in the past. I can't change them.
Yeah.
And so I must just carry on and move forward, knowing that I'm forgiven and that, I want to make different choices in the future.
Definitely. Nice. So do you want to share a little bit more about the fall feasts and where we were going with that?
Well, of course, one of the things that that people like to do is predict what year Yeshua is returning.
Yeah.
We've all heard the predictions. There's a gentleman on the West Coast who's made some rather startling, predictions just in the last few months. I believe it was May 21, and then it was some other date, after that. Not understanding that the Father works on His calendar, not on man's calendar.
True. Okay.
And so the whole idea that God would have penciled in May 21st onto a Gregorian calendar, once you begin to understand the Hebrew, is just kind of ludicrous. That it isn't going to be on a Gregorian calendar. It's going to be on the biblical calendar. And so that was something that was a little bit intriguing to me in the beginning, because when I first made this commitment that we were going to walk a messianic path, I expected the Lord to tell me that He wanted me, first of all, to learn Hebrew. And knowing that that's a challenge because I'm language challenged to begin with. And it was intriguing to me because the Father said, I want you to start by learning my calendar and getting on my calendar and teaching my calendar. Little did I know that included eschatology. That's something that 3 or 4 years ago, if you had said, Randall, today you're going to be teaching eschatology, I would have just kind of chuckled and said, I don't think so.
And what is eschatology? For
Eschatology is, that's a good question. Eschatology is the study of end times, the study of the end, literally. And so we understand that that Abba talks much more in his scriptures about eschatology than we ever dreamed. We thought that it was vague and nebulous, and Revelation was virtually impossible to understand. But once you begin to see, the scriptures in the light of how they connect with one another. Paul taught a lot on eschatology, as a matter of fact. And he tells the Thessalonians, for example, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and chapter 5, that you know these things. You've been taught these things. You will not be caught by surprise. That for non-believers, Yeshua's coming will be as a thief in the night. But not for you, because we've taught you, and you know these things, and you are now people of the light. And so he teaches about the last trump. He teaches that on the seventh trump, Messiah will come. He also taught the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15, starting in about verse 52. Talks about in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, we will be caught up in the air. And from, that time on, Paul teaches, we will always be with Messiah as he defeats the enemy, as he comes to the day that he knows as the day of vindication. And so... So there's much more in Scripture that we deal with often in a seminar format, and so we schedule these seminars from time to time, and throughout the Albuquerque area, and we'll certainly our viewers can get that schedule by going to our website www.forerunners.us that you see there at the bottom of the screen. And that calendar will keep you up to date on the events that are happening where we teach on these subjects and really go deep in them rather than just giving kind of an overview like we're doing today. Yeah,
definitely. Well, thank you. Yes, I know as we talk, the more I learn, the more I realize it does go deeper, and it takes time to study that and really understand those things. So for those viewers that want to check that out, they can. So Randall, before we end tonight, do you want to share a little bit about the one scripture in Revelation that you mentioned previously?
I will share that.
Okay.
Revelation 10:7 is referring to the seventh trumpet, which we talked a little bit about Paul's teaching to the Thessalonians and the Corinthians connected to this particular time. This is the day of Yom Teruah. This is the day of the shofar sounding that we are listening for on Yom Teruah. And Revelation 10:7 says, and I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Bible, then, I'm starting with verse 5, then the angel I saw standing on the sea and on the land lifted his right hand toward heaven and swore by the one who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it. There will be no more delay. On the contrary, in the days of the sound from the seventh angel, when he sounds his shofar, the hidden plan of God will be brought to completion. The good news as he proclaimed it to his servants, the prophets. So, connecting the dots from Paul's teaching to the revelation that John received from Yeshua himself on the seventh trumpet, the hidden plan of God. Not hidden to believers, but hidden to those who are not believers. Hidden to those who have not labored to study the Word. Those who have not been paying attention. Those who, Yeshua said, it'll be like the days of Noah. They'll be drinking and marrying and eating and being, not paying attention to what is happening in the world around us. We live in that day where people are not paying attention. We live in that day where people are disregarding the signs that we see in the earth and the heavens because they simply do not know that this plan Abba is bringing to completion. And it will be glorious. It will be beyond our ability to comprehend. And I wish I knew all the details, but the details I do know excite me greatly because he's coming to redeem his people.
Thank you for sharing that. And I thank you for being with us today. This is Dina and Randall.
Shalom, shalom. Hi, it's Randall again. We are so appreciative of the fact that you have tuned in today, and we hope that you will be praying for this show to have the impact that we believe the Lord would like for it to have. In addition to that, if you feel led to make a financial contribution to help keep this program going in the future, we would ask that you would send an offering to Post Office Box 624, Socorro, New Mexico, 87801. Please make your check or money order to Forerunner Ministries. Have a blessed day, and we hope to see you next week.